Hello! The Texas Chain Saw Massacre game is finally here, and now I feel better equipped to discuss the game fully, having put a fair few hours into it already. One thing I really don't want to do is overly compare TCM to other asymmetrical horror titles in the genre, especially Dead by Daylight. They are different games with different playstyles, but having said that, some comparisons are inevitable. I will likely do a video analysing the core gameplay of TCM in the future, as I've had so much fun playing it with my friends, but for today I want to focus on what I think is the most questionable feature in the game: the progression system. Progression in video games has to, in itself, be a rewarding, enjoyable experience. In video games, these are often interlinked with the idea of compulsion loops. Compulsion loops are the concept of a habitual designed chain of activities that will be repeated to gain a neurochemical reward, a feeling of pleasure and/or relief from pain. For example, it feels good to level up, see your character become stronger, unlock new abilities, and hear a pleasant sound notification, etc. Today we're going to be exploring the compulsion loop and progression system in Texas Chain Saw Massacre the game. To do this, first we're going to explore gamification models, discuss the current skill tree system within the game, we'll reflect on user experience and the concept of juice, and attempt to make some suggestions on ways I would adjust and improve the current system, whilst trying not to lose the strengths it also currently features. So without any further delay, let's jump into it. A paper by DeBells describes 3 gamification models to improve customer experience. These are freemium, immersion, and grindcore. Freemium is a common model often found in the mobile market. This is when a game is free to play but features some level of grind, such as resource gathering to upgrade buildings or improve your characters. The idea here is to hook the player into the game with early game leveling, with lots of satisfying rewards and dopamine hits. Once the player is invested in the compulsion loop, the developers hope to convince the player to speed up their progression by spending real life money on microtransactions. Secondly, there is the immersion model. This is essentially keeping the user in the flow of gameplay. Game flow relates to how the player feels within the virtual environment. Flow tends to occur when a person faces a clear set of goals that require appropriate responses. It is an attempt to balance the player's skill requirements and the game's difficulty to absorb the player into the game world, to connect them to their in-game avatar. As stated prior, it also relies on a clear set of goals, so a strong focus on user experience is also required. We'll discuss that more later in the video. Examples of game flow could be when you're playing a driving game and you turn your body in the same direction as the vehicle, or when in a horror experience, getting that tense feeling of dread as you fall silent listening out in case something is creeping up behind you. You become immersed in the game world. TCM certainly achieves this in its core game, especially when playing as a victim. Hearing Sissy singing get closer, or the revving of Leatherface's chainsaw run past you as you cower in the corner. But there is one other model which I think is the most important for today's topic. Grindcore is traditionally associated with MMOs, where a player is sometimes forced away from their main questline to earn experience or collect new companions. DeBells describes that these activities provide rewards, but require participation in predictable, tedious, and repetitive activities. I would suggest many games, especially in the asymmetrical genre, rely on some degree of tedious grind element to keep the player engaged, be it repairing a generator or lockpicking doors. And players do tend to enjoy having something to grind for. You only have to look at Dead by Daylight's community boasting about how many Prestige 100 characters they have. But TCM has a slightly different approach. So let's describe the skill tree system available in the Texas Chain Saw Massacre game in some detail. We've already described compulsion loops, which are a big part of keeping the player engaged in a repetitive set of actions, which near enough all asymmetrical games these days implement. In the case of TCM, this is play the main game, earn experience points, and then level up your account and perks. This is the dopamine hit of the compulsion loop. During a match, players earn experience points based off specific actions. For example, for every obstacle Leatherface destroys, he earns 50 experience points. For every bone trap a victim cuts down, they earn 25. At the end of said match, these experience points are added to your overall player level, whilst also adding experience points to your equipped perks and character specific ability. By leveling up your account level, you earn skill points, which can be spent on individual family members or victims to level them up as well. By leveling these characters up, you can unlock new perks and attribute points, which you can then use to increase your character stats. You can respec your character at any time to refund your skill points, which you can then choose to spend on completely different characters or the same one you just respec'd, which you'll want to do to reveal the entire skill tree. You must spend skill points through the entire skill tree to be able to see it in its entirety, even after you've gotten a character to the maximum level, which is 10. When you respec, you will reset your perks, but retain any experience or levels you achieved on them. It's also worth noting that perk experience is character specific, so a level 3 perk on Connie will not affect the same perk on Anna. And with there being 44 victim perks and 31 family perks on each character, that's 375 perks to work towards getting to level 3, which for me hits that grindcore model pretty well. Plenty to keep the player busy, but it's not enough to simply have a grindy element for the players to work through. It's got to feel good, which brings me to my favourite topic. User experience encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. This is quite a broad definition, so let me adjust it to be a little more specific and to make it clearer for the context of our topic. User experience in video games encompasses all aspects of the player's interactions with the user interface, how the mechanics function, and the game's virtual environment. And one of the most important elements in regards to UX is feedback. In e-games, feedback can improve learning and help the learner to take decisions about his strategy, and it also encourages the learner's motivation. So what I am suggesting for the progression system to have a good user experience is it needs to have a strong compulsion loop, an easy to navigate user interface, and give adequate feedback to the player to motivate and encourage them. One way in which games can improve feedback is utilising something known as juice. Juicy things are things that wobble, squirt, bounce around, and make little cute noises. It's a sort of catch-all phrase for things that make a game more satisfying to interact with. So for example, when you pick up a coin in Mario, you hear a satisfying sound effect. Or when you hit a great skill check in Dead by Daylight, you hear a sound notification and see a visual 300 plus blood points. What these are is a form of feedback to the player. These help to encourage and motivate the player. They essentially tell the player good job in a juicy way. Now that we have described the progression system in the Texas Chain Saw Massacre game, and identified what I consider to be the most important elements to stimulate and encourage the player, let me describe the issues I perceive in the current system. So let's start with the positive. The user interface is fairly easy to digest. It did take me a moment to realise how to access the character specific ability skill tree rather than the standard skill tree, but once you know it's there, it's fine. Being able to expand the visibility of the skill tree is definitely helpful, especially when trying to put together a perk build. But this brings me to my first concern. The game features loadouts, and they discuss the concept of developing your builds in the metagame explained livestream. Perk builds are a part of the game, but you can only create a build with the skill tree path you have followed, so it feels very disjointed to have a game which is about theory crafting a build, but having to respec a lot if you want to mix it up. Which brings me to concern number 2. The skill tree is not satisfying to interact with. It's fairly slow having to click through each node one at a time, and if I'm expected to respec so much, I would really like to see this refined. I do have a suggestion for this in the next chapter though, so don't worry. Gaining experience in TCM is a core feature of the compulsion loop. It's what feeds the player's grind. This is another element I feel is missing one key ingredient: juice. In a match, I think one thing which could be taken from other games in the genre, such as Dead by Daylight, is a visible score when I do a successful action, which supports my team. As of now, to check points, you have to look at the score screen mid-game. I'd much prefer if when I break an obstacle as Leatherface, an indicator of plus 50 could appear in the top right corner, for example. This links back to the idea of encouraging the learner's motivation. It would support new players, but also feel good for the experienced ones. Give a player some points for the first time the car battery is turned on. This will encourage and teach hitchhiker players to do this role. Further to this, the match end screen could be juiced up a bit. I'm sure they've balanced experience points and the grind, but as of now, it doesn't feel great to earn those points. So give me more things to look at maybe. I know the developers are keen to avoid a competitive vibe, but some stats in the end screen such as Connie unlocked 4 basement doors, or Leatherface destroyed 14 objects. With perhaps some small amount of bonus experience points for these accolades could really make it feel more rewarding. It might also continue to encourage players to do their role justice. Right now, I see the development team tweeting tips for characters. Why is the game not just encouraging the behaviours? With an arguably unengaging tutorial video package in the game, we could maybe add some more support elsewhere with more player feedback. So these are some smaller issues I've spotted, but as stated earlier, the skill tree itself feels fairly slow and unexciting to interact with as it stands. Rather than just say it's bad though, I do want to try and provide solutions or ideas to help. So let me try to adapt the current system without damaging their vision. The first thing that's worth noting is the strengths of the current skill tree system. It does allow the developers to adjust what perks can be given to the player in unison with others. This can help them balance and avoid conflicting perks or broken combinations. It also gives the player a feeling of choice, following their chosen path and their choice specialities, gaining attribute points along the way. The drawbacks to this system is it is quite slow to get through, especially when trying to create a build. The randomised perks also encourage re-rolls of your skill tree, which is time consuming and quite repetitive in the wrong way. So here is my solution. Firstly, I would get rid of the randomised perks altogether. They feel out of place if part of the game's design encourages players to create perk builds. Then, rather than a skill tree, maybe more of a circular shape. It's clearer for the player to see the destination. You can make each level a set number of skill points, making it feel more like a landmark level up each time. As for the rewards for leveling up, as an example, level 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 and 10 could produce a perk for the player to choose from. To ensure the current skill tree strengths are protected, perks could have a somewhat invisible category system, so at level 1, the player can pick a singular category 1 perk. If there are multiple early game perks you don't want the player to be able to have together, they simply both go into the same category. You can only pick one perk from the first selection. This would also allow the players to see all perks easier, encouraging them to try new perks quicker, while still forcing them to level up to see the next layer of options. You could also cater the upcoming choices based on your prior choices if the developers so choose. So if the player opts to pick a strength perk first for Victim, perhaps stealth and proficiency related perks are no longer available in the next selections. The same can apply for the family role, but with their unique and grandpa abilities thrown into the mix alongside savagery, blood harvesting and endurance related perks. I would also allow each loadout to have its own selection through the levels, meaning you can have a totally different build not limited by your path through the skill tree. The in-between levels of 2, 4, 6, 8, and I'd give this at 10 as well, would each provide 5 attribute points, meaning each character at level 10 would have 25 points to spend on their attributes. As of right now, your build can somewhat alter your number of attribute points you receive when you reach level 10. For example, my Leatherface has 27 and Sissy 23. I think a more uniform number is simpler for the player to understand. This system would ideally also speed up respeccing altogether and make it feel a lot less daunting for newer and experienced players. So that's my fix. It's a fairly simple concept and I'm sure I'm overlooking something, but it's a starting point. The great thing about the Texas Chain Saw Massacre game is the core game, the main part, is awesome. That's the most important thing. They can completely rework everything outside of it over time and it will only continue to improve the game. And no game comes out perfect. Even The Witcher 3, one of the most beloved games of all time, had a fairly bland user interface for a long time before they completely revamped and improved it throughout. And TCM is still incredibly new. I totally understand that we have to let them cook. Although I currently don't love the progression system, it is far from bad, it just needs tweaking. But what do you think? Perhaps you like the current progression system, or maybe you have some alternative solutions. Do let me know in the comment sections below. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching. Good luck getting out of the basement and catching those pesky victims.